The agricultural sector suffered heavy losses, with initial reports indicating over 60% of local crops destroyed. Grain silos crumpled like cans, and irrigation systems were twisted beyond recognition. Dozens of livestock barns collapsed, and fencing across thousands of acres was torn away. Farmers say it could take years to recover. One dairy cooperative reported 180 animals missing or dead. The State Agricultural Board is coordinating emergency aid and veterinary support in the hardest-hit rural zones. A 9-year-old boy separated from his parents during evacuation was found safe at a shelter 60 miles away. Volunteers shared his photo online, and it was seen by a cousin who contacted officials. Reunification took 2 days. He was scared but okay, said a nurse at the shelter. Over 200 children were temporarily unaccompanied in the days following the storm.
I have no idea how strong these winds are.
During the worst hours of the storm, volunteer firefighter Dana Price made solo trips by boat into flooded neighborhoods, rescuing 11 people, including a bedridden woman and 3 small children. With official resources overwhelmed, Price launched her own kayak from the fire station and worked through the night. "I just couldn't sit there and wait," she said. Battling wind, darkness, and floating wreckage, she pulled one family from a rooftop using bed sheets as rope. Residents are calling her a hero. "She didn't hesitate," one survivor said. "She saved us when no one else could get through." After the storm passed, silence fell so suddenly it felt wrong. Everything that once made sound, birds, cars, wind chimes, was gone or broken. James stood barefoot in the wet grass, staring at the sky. His house had lost half its roof, and a pine tree lay across his porch. But all he could think about was how quiet the world had become. "It felt like the wind stole the noise," he later told a neighbor. That night, he slept on a mattress in the garage, listening for anything to return. As students and staff were being evacuated from the local high school, a massive gust tore off the gymnasium roof, sending metal panels flying across the parking lot. Surveillance footage shows teachers herding children out just moments before collapse. "We had 20 seconds, maybe less," said Principal Harris. No one was injured, though several cars were crushed by falling debris. Officials say the storm's wind speeds exceeded 120 miles per hour. The gym, built in the 1960s, was not rated for such conditions. Classes remained suspended. "We were lucky," Harris added. "That wind came for blood." In one neighborhood, a woman returned to find her brother's car still in the driveway, keys inside, but no sign of him. His phone last pinged from the cell tower nearby minutes before landfall. Teams searched surrounding woods and ditches. As of Friday, he remains missing. It is one of 127 open missing person cases linked to the storm. Coast Guard crews rescued 27 people from rooftops in one suburb alone. High water made roads impassable, and helicopters worked for hours. Most were elderly, some waving towels or flashlights. One couple was lowered in a harness with their cat in a laundry basket. All were taken to a makeshift landing zone at the football stadium and evaluated for injuries. No one expected the tree to survive. It had stood in the town square for over a century, and as the storm hit, people watched it bend almost to the ground. The next morning, every building around it was damaged. Windows shattered, signs ripped off, but the tree still stood, stripped of leaves but upright. Someone tied a ribbon to its trunk. 2 days later, others added flowers, candles, handwritten notes. It became a quiet monument to the idea that some things, even in chaos, can hold fast. A group of 5 hikers who had set out before the storm were reported overdue when families lost contact. Their last known location was near a backcountry trail in the national forest. Heavy winds toppled trees and blocked access roads. Rescue teams located their abandoned campsite but found no sign of the hikers. A coordinated search is underway with drones, dogs, and volunteers. A canine search team located 2 missing teens in a collapsed shed behind their home. They had taken shelter there after the main house roof failed. The dog alerted to movement under debris. Rescuers dug them out with hand tools. Both were cold and bruised, but safe. "We thought no one knew we were here," said one of the teens through tears. Following the hurricane's landfall, hundreds of birds were found lifeless across downtown rooftops and streets, apparently killed mid-flight by powerful wind bursts. Experts believe the sudden pressure changes and extreme gusts disoriented or crushed them mid-air. They had no chance, said a local wildlife official. It was like a wall of air moving at highway speeds. Residents were stunned by the eerie sight. It looked like they just fell from the sky, one woman said. Cleanup crews collected the bodies as part of post-storm recovery. Scientists call the event rare, but not unprecedented. When the winds began tearing shingles from roofs, 68-year-old Lester Jennings ran outside to retrieve his garbage bins. A sudden gust knocked him off his feet and sent him sliding across his lawn. He grabbed onto the metal base of his mailbox and held on as the wind roared over him. "I thought I'd be blown into the next county," he said. When the storm passed, he was soaked, bruised, but alive. His mailbox was bent and his house badly damaged, but Jennings credits that metal post for saving his life. "Strongest thing I ever installed," he joked. During peak gusts, Harold Grant stepped outside to check on his generator and was lifted off his feet by hurricane winds. He landed 30 feet away in a muddy ditch, stunned but alive. "It felt like a hand just picked me up and dropped me," he said. He suffered bruises and a fractured wrist, but managed to crawl back inside his home before the next wave of wind hit. Emergency crews later found trees snapped like twigs in his yard. "I'll never take wind warnings lightly again," Grant said from his hospital bed, smiling weakly. As winds intensified and their home began to shake, the Patel family abandoned their living room and climbed into the walk-in freezer at the back of their restaurant. With wind screaming outside and parts of the roof tearing away, they sat in darkness for over an hour, surrounded by bags of frozen vegetables and crates of meat. "It was the only room with no windows and a steel door," said Mrs. Patel. When they emerged, the dining area was destroyed, but the freezer was untouched. "Cold never felt so safe," joked their teenage son.
Tudo, caiu tudo. Nossa, gente, eu nunca vi isso aqui acontecendo. Caiu todas as árvores. Filha do céu. Tornado mesmo.
Officials gave coastal towns 36 hours to evacuate. Despite warnings, some chose to stay. In one beachside community, only 14 of 113 residents left. Emergency responders recorded final GPS coordinates of every home.
Oh my God.
They were polite but firm, one woman recalled. By the time she changed her mind, the roads were flooded. She was rescued 4 days later by helicopter. Moments before a violent gust lifted their camper off the ground, 9-year-old Tyler was yanked out by his older sister, who heard the structure creaking. "I don't know why, but I just grabbed him and ran," she said. Seconds later, the wind tossed the camper 50 feet across a field, smashing it into trees. The family had ignored evacuation orders, thinking the storm wouldn't hit hard. Officials say the siblings narrowly avoided tragedy. "If she had waited even 5 seconds more," a firefighter said, "we'd be telling a different story." She didn't cry when the window broke or when the front door blew open. But when she saw her wedding photo floating face down in the living room, water pooling beneath it, something in her cracked. She picked it up, wiped it gently, and sat down in the middle of the chaos, holding it in her lap. "We'll be okay," she said aloud, though no one else was there. Hours later, when help arrived, she was still sitting there, calm, still, like part of the house itself. A 30-foot metal billboard was torn from its supports and hurled through the second-story window of a downtown apartment complex. Miraculously, no one was in the room when it hit. The wind-carried structure demolished furniture, shattered glass, and embedded part of itself into the opposite wall. "It sounded like a bomb went off," said a neighbor. Fire officials said if the impact had happened an hour earlier, during a birthday party in the same unit, there would have been fatalities. The billboard's remains were later found 4 blocks away. A man's entire roof was torn off in a single gust. But what stunned neighbors most was that it landed upright, perfectly intact, 2 houses down. "It was like a hat blown off someone's head," one witness said. No one was hurt, though the home is now considered structurally unsafe. Insurance adjusters called it an extremely rare wind pattern event. The homeowner joked, "If anyone needs a roof, I've got a spare." A giant inflatable gorilla, once perched above a used car lot, was spotted drifting high above rural farmland after being snatched by hurricane winds. Witnesses reported seeing the 30-foot figure tumbling through the sky, like a flying bear doing flips. It eventually landed in a tree nearly 12 miles away, startling a herd of cattle. No one was injured, but videos of the airborne mascot have gone viral. "He was our landmark," said the dealership owner. "Now he's a legend." Officials reminded business owners to deflate outdoor inflatables before storms. In the rural outskirts of the county, two massive wind turbine blades snapped mid-storm, scattering fiberglass across nearby fields. Residents say the sound was like cannon fire. One farmer found a 12-foot shard embedded in his barn. It missed the cows by inches, he said. The turbines, rated for high winds, weren't meant to withstand the recorded 140 miles per hour gusts. No injuries were reported, but the incident reignited debate about wind energy infrastructure in hurricane-prone areas. Engineers have been dispatched to assess the remaining turbines for structural weakness. Responders searching a flooded street found a 2-year-old girl sitting on a floating couch, soaked but alive, her arms wrapped tightly around the family dog. No adults were nearby. The home had been destroyed hours earlier, and it's believed the rising water lifted the furniture to safety. The dog, a Labrador mix, reportedly barked until rescuers approached. Both were taken to a shelter, where the girl was quickly reunited with relatives. "We don't know how they survived," one firefighter said, but that dog never left her side. Authorities are calling it a small miracle amid widespread devastation. At 3 a.m., police cruisers drove slowly down residential streets, loudspeakers repeating evacuation orders in English and Spanish. Most families had already gone, but some waited too long. Volunteers knocked on doors, helped an elderly woman down the stairs, and carried a toddler wrapped in a blanket. Buses idled at the school parking lot as final groups climbed aboard. Hours later, that neighborhood was underwater. "We got out just in time," said one man, still clutching his dog. The morning after, children wandered the neighborhood, pointing out what had changed. "That tree wasn't broken before," one said. "That trampoline wasn't there." They turned it into a game, spot the difference, but the parents watched in silence, tallying lost cars, collapsed roofs, shredded fences. One boy found a soggy storybook in a ditch and began reading aloud, sitting cross-legged on the wet sidewalk. Others joined him. For a moment, no one remembered the night's terror, only the sound of a child's voice trying to bring a story back to life. After the storm, a cross made of driftwood was discovered lodged upright in a sand dune where dozens had sought shelter. Locals have since preserved it as a symbol. "It felt like he marked the place where we were saved," said one evacuee. "We'll never move it." Over 4,000 utility poles were downed across the affected zone, leaving more than 300,000 residents without power. Some communities may remain dark for weeks. Substations flooded, transmission lines snapped, and transformer fires were reported in multiple locations. Repair crews from 6 neighboring states have been dispatched, working 16-hour shifts. "We've never had this many lines down at once," said a utility spokesperson. Hospitals and shelters are running on backup generators, with fuel being airlifted into remote areas.
A storm rips the roof off a shed with the owner still on top of it.
The downtown business district was left in ruins after sustained winds sheared off signage,
Besides a
shattered
couple of
storefronts, and
bruises,
caused
he was
partial
completely
collapses
fine.
in 4 commercial buildings. The city estimates more than $70 million in damage to infrastructure alone. Crews are still working to clear glass and metal from the main thoroughfares. Of the 123 businesses surveyed post-storm, only 27 were able to reopen. Local officials have requested federal disaster relief as cleanup efforts intensify. Paramedics carried a boy with cerebral palsy down 4 flights of stairs after the elevator failed and rising water threatened the building. His wheelchair was damaged, but they improvised with a rolling dolly and straps. "They didn't hesitate," said his mother. "They treated him like family." The family was later airlifted to a shelter equipped for medical needs. A firefighter swam across a flooded intersection carrying a life vest in his teeth. Inside the stranded SUV was a woman 9 months pregnant. Contractions already started. With help from neighbors, she was floated on an air mattress to dry ground, then rushed to a hospital. Her baby was born 2 hours later, healthy and strong. "He came into the world like a rescue mission," the father said.